Ladies and gentlemen, the real shift happens the day she stops caring that he ignored her. Because in that moment, her silence becomes a storm he can't escape, and her absence becomes the punishment he never saw coming. And suddenly, the woman he treated like nothing becomes the loss he can never replace. Sometimes we think people break us by walking away, but the truth is, they expose themselves. They expose the fact that they never deserved the depth of our loyalty, the softness of our heart, or the fire of our spirit. Being ignored hurts, not because we need their attention, but because we once believed we mattered to them. But healing begins the moment you understand that love should never feel like begging, and your presence should never feel like an option. When someone ignores you, it is not your job to convince them to see your value. It is your job to rise so strongly that their indifference becomes irrelevant. This is not about revenge. This is about rebirth. About rebuilding the version of you who stopped shrinking just to be seen by someone who didn't deserve your light. This is your turning point, your awakening, your moment of reclaiming your power. Stop explaining your worth to people who choose ignorance. Sometimes the heart keeps trying to speak even when the world around it has gone silent, because it believes that if it explains itself a little more, maybe the other person will finally understand the depth it carries. But the truth is that people who choose to ignore you are not struggling to hear you. They are choosing not to listen, and this is a truth you must learn to respect. There comes a moment when you realize that your worth was never meant to be proven in words, but felt in presence. And anyone who fails to acknowledge that presence does not deserve the privilege of it, no matter how deeply you once cared. Every time you try to convince someone of your value, you shrink a part of yourself. You dim a little of your light, and you chip away at the confidence that was supposed to be your foundation, not something you hand over to someone careless. Your heart was created to beat freely, not to beg for attention. And the person who ignores you is simply showing you that they were never ready for the love you carry, the kindness you offer, or the loyalty you give, without hesitation. You must understand that explaining yourself becomes exhausting when your truth keeps falling onto ears that have no intention of hearing. And in that exhaustion, you find a new kind of clarity, a new kind of courage, a new kind of strength. It is in silence that you discover that you were never supposed to fight for a place in someone's life. You were supposed to flow where your value is honored, where your presence is appreciated, where your heart feels safe. The moment you finally stop explaining yourself is the moment you return to yourself. And in returning to yourself, you rise, you rebuild, and you remember that your worth was always bigger than their ignorance. Distance is the most powerful answer to disrespect. There is a profound strength in simply stepping back, a kind of quiet courage that speaks louder than any confrontation. Because distance reveals what words fail to explain, and it forces the other person to sit with the silence they created. You begin to understand that when someone disrespects you, you don't need to teach them a lesson with anger or arguments. Because withdrawing your presence does what your voice cannot. It removes the comfort they were taking for granted. Distance is not abandonment. It is self-preservation. It is the space you create to protect your peace, your dignity, and your emotional energy. Especially when someone has shown you they are not worthy of being close to your heart. The absence you create becomes a mirror they cannot escape, reflecting back the truth of what they lost access to. And it is in that reflection that regret quietly begins to grow inside them. Silence becomes your statement. A statement that rises from your strength, not your bitterness. Because sometimes the loudest message is sent by simply refusing to participate in disrespect. As you step away, you feel parts of yourself returning, your clarity returning, your worth returning. And you realize that distance didn't just teach them something, it healed something inside you. And when they finally notice your absence, when they feel the void you once filled so beautifully, they come to understand that the most powerful answer you ever gave them was choosing to walk away. Choose yourself before you chase anyone. There is an emotional exhaustion that comes from chasing someone who shows no intention of meeting you halfway, an exhaustion that slowly empties your spirit until you realize you are running after someone who was not looking at you to begin with. Choosing yourself becomes the moment you decide to stop pouring life into a connection that drains you. and you begin to reclaim all the love, energy, and loyalty you were handing over to someone who barely noticed its worth. You start to see that love should never feel like a race, and your heart should never feel like it must compete for attention. Because the person meant for you will never make you feel like you're asking for too much. The day you choose yourself, you choose healing over hurting, peace over chaos, and dignity over desperation. And suddenly the world starts to feel less heavy because you stopped carrying someone who wasn't carrying you. You begin to breathe again. Not because they came back, but because you stopped abandoning yourself every time they ignored you. And you finally realize that your own heart deserves the love you kept giving away. Choosing yourself transforms you, strengthens you, awakens you, and shows you that you were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. And in choosing yourself, you step into a life where you no longer chase anyone, because you have finally chosen the one person who never should have been neglected. You let your growth remind them of what they lost. There is a kind of transformation that happens after heartbreak, a quiet rising from the ashes, not to prove anything to the one who broke you, but to rebuild yourself in a way that makes your strength undeniable. Growth becomes your silent message, the message that replaces every conversation you once tried to have. The message that shows the world that your pain did not destroy you, it remade you. You begin to glow differently, not because someone returned to your life, but because you returned to your own soul, and you discovered a version of yourself you had forgotten existed. As you evolve, the things that once shattered you begin to feel distant, and the person who once ignored you begins to realize that you no longer stand in the place they left you. Your growth becomes a reminder to them, not through revenge, but through the simple truth that you flourished in the absence of the person who thought you couldn't survive without their presence. Every step forward becomes a quiet echo in their memory, an echo that grows louder each time they see you rise into a more confident, more powerful, more self-aware version of yourself. And while they finally begin to understand what they lost, you continue moving toward everything you were meant to become, untouched by their regret and strengthened by your own evolution. The only price he pays is losing access to you. There is no deeper consequence for someone who ignored you than losing the privilege of your presence, because once you walk away, the person they used to know no longer exists, and no version of you will ever look back the same way. He loses access to your kindness, the warmth of your conversations, the softness of your heart, and the comfort of knowing you were always there, even when he didn't deserve it. Time begins to show him what he failed to see, revealing the truth that people like you do not come around often, and your loyalty is not something he will find again easily. As he watches you grow, heal, and rise without him, a quiet regret begins to settle in his heart. The regret of knowing he ignored someone who would have stood by him through storms. Losing access to you means losing the emotional space where he was once understood, cared for, and supported. And no amount of longing can bring back the version of you who existed before the hurt. He begins to understand that ignoring you wasn't just a mistake, it was a decision that cost him a soul that loved him deeply. And that kind of loss is not easily forgotten. But while he pays the price of regret, you step into a new chapter where your happiness no longer depends on someone who never recognized your worth. In the end, when you finally understand that being ignored was not a reflection of your worth, but a revelation of theirs, and in that moment you stop breaking yourself to be understood by someone whose heart was never prepared to hold yours with care, and you rise with a new kind of strength, one that comes from choosing yourself over the silence they gave you and finding beauty in the space where you once felt abandoned. You begin to see that every unanswered message, every moment of indifference, every quiet dismissal was simply guiding you back to yourself, back to your own voice, back to your own light, and back to the truth that your presence is a privilege that not everyone is meant to receive. As you move forward, you stop wishing they had treated you better and start thanking life for teaching you the value of walking away. And in that powerful shift, you step into a life where your worth is no longer determined by someone else's attention, but by the love you give yourself, the peace you protect, and the strength you carry. You become a living reminder that the price of ignoring you is losing the blessing of you, and while they learn that lesson in silence, you bloom into the person you were always meant to be, untouched by their indifference and guided only by your own rising spirit.